Hello and welcome to another DW News live stream on the ongoing Iran war. In this stream, we want to look at how Iran is still being able to fire off missiles and drones in the region despite facing joint attacks from the might of US and Israeli forces. I'm Biresh Banerjee.
And I'm Binesh Javed. I will be in the community chat that we have going with this stream and bring in your questions and comments into the discussion.
So bring in your questions and comments right into us in the chat. Binesh is going to be monitoring it and bringing it into the discussion to help us answer some of the questions that you will be raising and the comments that you will have. We have a DW Middle East analyst Shani Rosanes in the studio to help answer some of your questions. And also joining us in some time will be Shaheen Modares, who's director of the Iran desk at the think tank ITSS in Verona in Italy. As we said earlier, today we want to look at how long Iran can actually hold out militarily in the face of the pressure that it's facing. And the reason for that question is this. Now, we're going to show you visuals of the US Embassy compound in Riyadh that was struck earlier today by Iran. I remember just yesterday, the US Embassy in Kuwait was also apparently struck. Now, this is in addition to missiles being fired at Israel, including at Jerusalem. You've also had missiles being fired at the UAE, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. The point being that Iranian missile and drone attacks continue, and they continue to hit their targets despite Israel and the Gulf nations having superior defense systems. Therefore, the question again is how, and this is something that we can throw to Shani Rosanes, who is in the studio with us and has been monitoring this conflict since it broke out about 4 days back now. Shani, Iran appears to still retain the capability to strike back. How is that possible?
Well, they were preparing, just like the Americans and Israel were preparing. In a way, what we've seen in June of 25 was sort of a dry, it wasn't dry, it was a wet, but it was a rehearsal, preparing both sides. This, many, both in Iran and the US and Israeli side, they have drawn many conclusions. For the Iranians, it was basically hiding better and fortifying their launchers, their missile stockpiles, making sure they're safer, even against very massive bunker-penetrating bombs that we know the Americans have. We know also that the Americans have used them at the end of the war that we have seen in June between mostly then Israel and Iran. And then back then, Trump was very glad to soon, right after, announce we have obliterated the Iranian nuclear plan. But here, 8 months later, we are back in the same place. So I guess we can assume the effectiveness of that attack was quite limited. And this is where we are still at. If we're talking about the nuclear facilities of Iran, we're still not quite sure that this has, any of the goals that Israel and the US have set on that path are completed. Another thing we need to take in mind when we talk about Iran, they're trying to change their strategy in the sense that they're trying to maybe be more synchronized in barrages of attacks going towards Israel, but from different location, maybe making it harder for the Israeli and American bombers to locate them and their launchers, many of which have already been destroyed.
So a lot of points that you're making. Let's try and pass through some of them. Let's try and look at how Israel is approaching this. What is the Israeli strategy here? One is the defense that they've been forced onto because of these barrages from Iran, albeit not in such great numbers. But what is the Israeli attack strategy here? What is Israel trying to do when it's going after locations in Iran?
Well, they started the first day was about securing flying routes, basically making sure that they are taking over any Iranian air missile programs, anything that might threaten the safe flight of Israeli and American planes above Iranian skies, mostly focusing on the western part of Iran, because this is also where the assumption is that most launchers are. It's just geographically makes the ranges much shorter, so it's easier and more comfortable and brings more accuracy for the Iranians to be shooting from the west. And what Israelis are claiming to do is that they're trying to gradually push Iranians further into the east, into the inner part of the country. So it will make it harder for them, and they will always need to, try and rethink their launching strategy as their location is being detected.
Explain to us the Israeli thinking here, because in the 12-day war last year, Israel targeted primarily Iranian mobile launchers, from which a lot of these missiles, short-range, long-range, are fired. Did Israel feel that it didn't target enough of these mobile launchers, that it has to go in for it now? Or did it feel that there was an imminent threat, potentially, because that was talked about by the Trump administration?
Well, let's take a recap of what we've seen in June. Israel did not finish that attack on its own. It was forced to finish it after Trump was very, very much pushing for Israel to stop it. It actually had to send its airplanes back. They did a U-turn mid-air after Trump. Maybe some of us remember this very, outspoken speech that he had given in the White House, basically demanding Israel to retaliate, talking about how they don't know what they're doing anymore. These two sides have been fighting for so long. So Israel was not super happy with the end line already in June and was waiting for the opportunity to improve its positions. And as I was saying, a lot of conclusions were drawn, a lot concerning Israel, for example, in the air defense and the different systems and how they operate, but also when it comes to attack on Iran, in a sense that attacking the mobile launchers, it's possible, but the bigger threat is the fortified launching areas that are hidden inside the mountains in Iran. They are harder to penetrate. Right. They give Iran more stability. But however, every time Iran does use them, they are actually risking the fact that they will be detected. Right. And they will be deactivated, or at least for a while, blocked. And that would need to change a strategy.
I have so many questions on bunker busting bombs, but maybe that is for a different live stream. And this live stream is basically about you and your questions and comments. And Binish has a few comments or questions.
We already have a comment. From Sebastian7394, and he's saying, I fear this is going to end badly. Either the Iranian regime will stay in power or there will be civil war like in Syria, which would be horrible. I think that's a fear and concern that many
Sebastian,
have.
I think you're very good, analyzing what's happening. These are two very probable scenarios. This could happen. We could see very much that this regime will stay in power. I mean, if we heard Pete Hegseth, the American Minister of War, I think he is called officially and not on defense, he was saying, even if we don't get a regime change, the regime has changed, and that is true. But which direction has it taken? Has it become more hardline, needing to avenge and revenge the death of the leader, far more hostile towards the U.S. and Israel after this undoubtedly a very, brash attack? Or is it going to be changing in a more pragmatic way, which will allow more collaboration and more compromise?
Yeah, and we have a comment similar to that. The Taliban came back, right, in Afghanistan. My point is, and this is from Deodat Mushk 5494, and they are saying, my point is that this is not an organic regime shuffle. And they're comparing it with Afghanistan, where Taliban came back.
Taliban is a great example. It's not the only one, where any forced attempt for a regime change is very limited in its success and in scope. I mean, we've seen it again and again and again. How organic it is, however, to Iran, I think we need to be very cautious here, because this is a regime that has major inner opposition. It is not popular among the majority of Iranians. There might be a conflict on whether the Shah should be coming back or not, whether it should be, there's the monarchs versus other forces in Iran. But the consensus by the majority of at least 85% of the 90 million people living in Iran is that this regime of the the Islamic Republic of Iran, this regime is an oppressive regime. Many of them do not identify with it, do not support it, and are happy to see it gone. The problem in Iran, which is also the same problem that had brought the success of the Islamic Revolution, was that it was always hard for the opposition to agree on what the alternative should be. It happened with the Shah, and it might be happening again when trying to figure out what would be the alternative to this.
But then the problem with Iran, isn't it? It's like there's very few examples of regime change having been enforced truly from the air, number one. And number two, in the absence of any identifiable opposition or identifiable opposing force that comes and literally sits on the seat of power. That doesn't appear to be happening with Iran,
this is what we're seeing.
Right?
The Pahlavi, the Shah's son, gaining more and more support, even within Iran, even with those who were not.
But it's a question of legitimacy, right? I mean, how legitimate is the Shah, the son of the Shah of Iran, who's basically grown up outside of Iran for more than 3 decades?
Correct, and it's there's no doubt he's been gaining more momentum in the last month, exactly because of that fear, the fear of the opposition, that lack of consensus on a leader will bring them will not bring them too far. And many of them are saying, well, maybe we'll need to look at it in more of a functional way. He himself has also said, I'm not interested in ruling Iran for the long term. I want to be the transition leader who's going to bring Iran into democracy, who's going to be the segue leader into the next phase of Iran. And maybe that would be good enough, at least at the beginning.
There are lots of questions, open questions, as to what the US sees as a likely outcome. At the moment, we seem to be stuck in this weird place in which this campaign is set to continue. At least that's what the Pentagon is saying. But the rest of the Trump team is saying, well, it's not going to be an endless war. There's going to be an end date to it whenever that happens. What is the Israeli approach here? What is the Israeli best case scenario? What does Israel expect is going to happen?
Well, it's good that you're mentioning it, because there is slight daylight between where Israel is and where the Americans are. The Americans are far more cautious when talking about the regime change, and Netanyahu from the beginning was very much all in. This is what we're aiming at. Because for Israel, it is clear, we were just mentioning that 8 months ago, there was the previous round. And for Israel, it's quite clear that as long as this regime is in power, there's no doubt there's going to be more and more of that. And the only way to eradicate the Islam threat on Israel is to get rid of this regime altogether. However, when we're trying, it's not by accident. We don't really understand the time frame, because we are hearing Trump saying so many different estimations that we are ahead of time. It might take a few weeks.
It depends on which briefing you're listening to, right?
Exactly. It depends on the mood. I think he's covering all of his bases. Israelis would like to see a new regime change. Definitely, that would be the key achievement for Netanyahu. I'm not sure the Americans will commit fully to back Israel in this plan.
J.D. Vance today said that it will not be a multi-year war.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, I think Donald Trump was at some point talking about 4 to 5 weeks, but then again, those are time frames that we can discuss. But I would like to bring in a guest whom we had teased at the top of the show. We're talking about Shaheen Modares, who is who's the director, of the Iran desk at the think tank ITSS in Verona. He joins us now. Shaheen, good to have you on the program. I mean, the whole question in this stream that we have raised is about how Iran is still being able to carry out these military strikes, how it's still being able to retaliate in the region. Why is that? How is it being able to do it? Is it because of mobile launchers that are still undetected? Is there another stockpile of missiles that the United States and Israel doesn't know about? How is Iran being able to do it?
Hello, and thank you for having me. We should consider a few elements, indexes that can contribute in this matter. The first one goes back to the last 4 days of the 12-day war, when the Islamic Republic began using mobile launchers and using a different sort of algorithm and pattern in order to make sure that they can semi-saturate the Israeli aerial defense systems, whilst actually blindly launching missiles towards Israel, not caring if they're going to take civilian or military casualties. So after that, what the Islamic Republic has done after the 12-day war, since the beginning of the new war, intervention of the US and Israel against the Islamic Republic in Iran, what they have done is that they have transferred a significant number of the stockpiles of the ballistic missiles that they had into underground bunkers, and as well into civilian places, civilian sites, creating human shield, just like their proxy groups. These are the two main indexes why this is happening right now.
Okay, you're talking about mobile launchers and a saturation of defenses that they were trying to do earlier. Let's just bring up some numbers here concerning Iran's armed forces and the capabilities, the military capabilities that Iran has. We'll just throw it up on the screen for all of you guys watching the stream. This is basically a graphic that we intend to bring up about Iran's military capabilities, including the number of troops that Iran has. Now, if you combine the army, the air, naval, and the ground forces, you're looking at about 610,000 troops. And this also includes the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. There's something of an estimate of around 1,500 ballistic missiles just before this round of hostilities began. And that is way lower than around 3,000 that Iran had till before June last year. Iran also supplies and manufactures the Shahid drone that you've seen show up in Ukraine in the conflict in the war between Russia and Ukraine. Iran as yet does not have any nuclear weapons. And that is also one of the stated objectives of the Trump administration, to ensure that Iran never, ever has nuclear weapons. And it is that number of 1,500 ballistic missiles I wanted to come back to you on, Shaheen. I don't know if you were being able to see the graphic or not, but you certainly heard me. There's estimates that Iran has about 1,500 ballistic missiles, at least had, before this latest round of hostilities began. Will that be sufficient for Iran to hit back its neighbors and the United States or Israel where it hurts most? Or is this just going to be some form of retaliation, but that will not really make a mark in the long run?
I believe in the second scenario. I believe it will be some sort of retaliation, but in the long run, it will not make a significant move because of all the complex aerial defense systems that have implanted in the region and also protect Israel as well. The Islamic Republic is not to be underestimated. So they can and they will launch these 1,500 missiles against civilians if they have to, because they have proven to be doing this before, not caring about human lives. But in the long run, it will not make a big change because of the aerial defense systems in the region, such as TOD, Patriot, and the Iron Dome, and the David Sling, and also Shalosh Chetz, Arrow 3.
Okay, there's a number of points there. I want to talk about the time limits here, okay? Because Donald Trump was talking some time back about a potential 4 to 5 week window, because that is how much ammunition they have, and they have sufficient ammunition for that period. We're talking about the United States here. If you're looking at 1,500 missiles, some of which might be depleted from the Iranian side, and an unknown number of drones, how long can Iran sustain its retaliatory attacks?
Well, Iran can sustain its retaliatory attacks for a limited time. And that is the reason why fractions of the Islamic Republic, of what is left of the Islamic Republic, are eagerly trying to come to some sort of negotiations with the United States to make sure that they can survive. This is why the production of the drones, and particularly the cycle of producing the ballistic missiles, have been erupted by the Israeli attacks of the 12-day war, and it is becoming harder and harder for them to produce these. So what happens is, if the war elongates for more than 4 to 5 weeks, the US will have enough supplies, can recharge it, whilst Iran cannot.
It's certainly, the way you describe it is one of the clearest descriptions I've heard about what Iran is able to do and not able to do. But a question for you, Shani, and you've been monitoring the Middle East for quite some time. And we were just talking about this a short while back, how is Iran, a country which is reaching nearly 50% inflation, been under tough economic sanctions for years, and with curbs on imports and exports, how is it able to even fund having these missiles, and how is it be able to even have this weaponry in the first place?
Well, a big part of it is priorities. This is also what we've been seeing, the protest. U.S. intelligence a couple of months ago, said that they believe that Iran has channeled more than $1 billion to Hezbollah in the last year to help it replenish its reservoirs and to help it recover. So this is just an example. But what is the source of income for Iran? It's still oil. And we have to keep in mind that despite those sanctions, actually when it comes to crippling oil supply, it's a very limited tool that there is in the international arsenal, because once you forbid Iran, or actually you forbid others to buy Iranian oil, then you are actually removing Iranian oil from the supply, the international supply, and by that you are actually affecting oil prices for everybody, everywhere. So we've also seen it with Ukraine and Russia. There's a very, limited way with which the West and the sanctions can actually completely stop Iran from getting oil income without hurting itself as well.
The Strait of Hormuz comes into question, obviously, because the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and the Navy threatened to sort of shut it down. But the Iranian Navy was also attacked by US and Israeli forces, and I do believe that we have some images of the Navy being attacked, and that basically leads to the wider question, Shani, of whether the Iranian Navy even has it in itself to sort of force a complete shutdown of the Strait of Hormuz and completely shut down the transit of oil.
That's a great question, and the assumption is it's probably not. It's going to be very hard for them, even though we have seen more activity in the last 24 hours on ships that are going through the channel, so trying at least symbolically to show that they are not giving up on that way of retaliation.
Right.
Despite the fact there are Houthi rebels also very active there.
Well, they could be. They were throughout the last 2 years, mostly at the beginning. The Houthis were active basically starting October 7th in solidarity with Hamas up until a couple of months ago when the ceasefire was agreed upon. They were at the first very effective and very active. They have said they will join the fight, but we have actually seen very little from them in the last 4 days. Not to say that they will not join the fight. We've also seen Hezbollah. It's hard to understand the timing, but they still have the potential, and they can still create a lot of damage that will exacerbate the flow of oil and energy through the Gulf.
I want to go back to a point that you raised at the start of our conversation, Shani, about Iran's nuclear facilities. Now, the Natanz enrichment facility has apparently been attacked. There is some confirmation from the IAEA. We also have images showing before and after images of Natanz. This is the Natanz before it was struck by... it is not clear to me if it's US or Israeli ordnance, but at least one of the two. And there's before and after satellite images of Natanz showing certain damage. And the question that I'm really building up to, and this is for you, Shaheen, just so our viewers know, this is Shaheen. This is not Shaheen, I'm sorry. This is the Natanz nuclear facility before, and this is after the latest strikes against it. The question I'm building up to really here, Shaheen, is can you talk a bit about Iran's nuclear facilities? There was an attack in June last year in which the Trump administration claimed it had virtually obliterated Iran's potential to produce a nuclear weapon. What is this latest round of strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities achieving? And will this do the job, essentially ensure that Iran can never produce a nuclear weapon the way the United States wants it?
Well, it can do the job, but the complete job will be done only when there are boots on ground, meaning that the US and Israel can have soldiers on ground verifying and actually eliminating what is left of the Islamic Republic's nuclear program. Because yes, it has been attacked during the 12-day war, and yes, they are being attacked as we speak once again. But here is the big thing. They are deep, deep, deep in the mountains, into ground, and it is not going to be easy to make sure that the entrance is blocked or the tunnels are blocked. What matters is that the centrifuges that they have planted in these centers should be neutralized and eliminated.
If you don't mind, Shaheen, I would also like to ask you. There's one thing that we still don't quite know what happened to is the 408 kilograms of enriched uranium that the Iranians already during the 12-day war have declared to have managed to save. Do we have any idea where it is?
Recently, we have, up to this moment, we have absolutely no idea regarding where it is. But what we know is that the Iranian Foreign Minister, Abbas Araghchi, has been trying to use that as a leverage against the Americans and bluffing that we still have this in our possession. But it was a bluff that apparently didn't work.
There's something important you said, Shaheen, that if you really want to secure Iran's nuclear facilities and ensure that Iran does not make a bomb, you need boots on the ground. I cannot for the life of me understand that the United States and Israel probably understand that as well. There's only so much you can do with standoff weapons or from the air. Do you think boots on the ground will at some point, maybe in this round of conflict or maybe in a future one, boots on the ground will have to become a reality if the United States and Israel want to absolutely ensure that Iran does not make a nuclear weapon ever?
I think this scenario in the current war is possible, but only in a limited way, meaning that they might only let the special forces go inside the country to do the sabotage operations against what is left and what is crucially left of these nuclear sites. But a main invasion, meaning witnessing something like something that happened in Iraq, I don't think that would happen now.
How much of an appetite is there in Israel to be able to carry out such an operation?
Well, Israel has been doing these covert operations, including sabotaging some of the nuclear work and research, by assassinating nuclear staff and personnel and scientists. That's one. But also, we know, for example, of viruses that were injected into the Iranian system by unknown sources. I suspect they were probably connected somehow to Israel. And so there are other ways that Israel has been pursuing in the last years. But obviously, I also want to remind you, Netanyahu has shown to the whole world a couple of years back how he had managed to retrieve all of the archive, the nuclear archive of Iran. So Iran is deeply penetrated by the Israeli intelligence. That's no doubt about that. There's Mossad agents, the CIA, I assume also they're joining them. So far, it seemed not to have been enough because we find ourselves here. So no doubt there's a limit to how much you can do with these kind of operations.
All right. That's the military aspect that we wanted to sort of discuss on this stream. I think I'd like to sort of expand it to the region. But before I do that, Shaheen, I wanted to thank you for joining us. Shaheen Modar is director of the Iran desk at the think tank ITSS in Verona. Thanks so much for making the time. I'd like to expand this and look at the situation in Beirut now in Lebanon. In fact, and DW Beirut Bureau Chief Mohammad Shrete is standing by for us. Mohammad, a lot has been happening on the ground in Lebanon. Can you bring us up to speed as to where we are right now?
Yeah, just a short while ago, Israel launched 2 strikes on Dahye, the southern suburbs of Beirut. It's a Hezbollah stronghold, and the Israeli military is saying that it is targeting Hezbollah officials there. On the border, the news suggests that the Israeli military is working on creating a buffer zone in Lebanon and seizing more positions across the border. We spoke to a family a while ago as it was on the way out of the border town of Ait al-Shab. The family members were devastated for being obliged to leave their homes in the town, and they expressed fears that they might not come back again this time. The Israelis are deploying additional troops on the ground, and the Lebanese military, in fact, had pulled out from the area, at least from 7 forward positions across the border with Israel, according to Reuters.
But have attacks from Hezbollah against Israel, have they stopped?
No, the attacks are still occurring. In fact, Israeli media reported a while ago the launching of a barrage of rockets from southern Lebanon towards northern Israel. Since this morning, Hezbollah has put out 3 different statements claiming 3 attacks on Israeli positions in northern Israel.
It helps us understand how Hezbollah is able to carry out these attacks in the first place, because we've been reporting, and you've been there in Lebanon, you've seen this also. Hezbollah took a very strong blow from the IDF in the last couple of years, especially since the October 7th, the terrorist attacks against Israel. How is Hezbollah able to still mount these attacks against Israel?
Well, technically, everyone knew that Hezbollah still had the capacity to send rockets and drones towards Israel. The militant group was weakened a lot, massively weakened during the last major confrontation with Israel, but was not eradicated. The question was whether Hezbollah wants to bear the burden of these attacks, because Hezbollah knows all too well the Israeli response to these attacks, and that's what we're seeing so far. That basically, this decision of Hezbollah launching attacks not only dragging Lebanon into this confrontation, but also have deepened the division here in Lebanon between the Lebanese, who widely refuse Hezbollah's decision and have been criticizing it as they haven't yet recovered from the latest Israeli invasion of 2024.
You know, you're talking about Lebanon being dragged into a wider war. I mean, how real is the risk that that will happen, that Lebanon, in fact, does get dragged into a wider war?
I think Lebanon has been already dragged into this war, and that has been really very divisive here in Lebanon. The decision to join the war was widely criticized, even among people who originally supports Hezbollah. I think all the attempts by the government to curb Hezbollah's decision and to try to distance Hezbollah and Lebanon from entering this conflict and this confrontation have failed, and therefore we're just seeing a new confrontation. Maybe some Lebanese are feeling that it would be even more deadly this time.
You know, we're seeing images on our screens of civilians presumably leaving the south of Lebanon. You can see the evacuation there, images that we are playing at the moment. And I just wonder what the public feels, Mohammed. Is there public anger directed more at Israel, at Hezbollah, or the Lebanese government for the situation that these people find themselves in?
Well, there's a general feeling of desperation here in Beirut. People are really feeling helpless. There's a consensus of disappointment and anger towards Hezbollah, definitely. They blame Hezbollah of dragging the country into this conflict with Israel. But there's also this everlasting anger and hate, per se, towards Israel, as it's widely perceived in Lebanon as an aggressor here in Beirut. And you know, Israel is an enemy state here in Lebanon. We have to take this into account. Also, many of the families who fled the areas that were targeted, were attacked, have been sleeping in their cars. It took them hours, long hours, to arrive to Beirut, into schools and shelters that the government opened to accommodate these refugees. But this is not enough. Some of them are still sleeping in public squares because schools are full. So they also direct some anger towards the government, who they say it didn't do enough to help them.
All right, we'll leave it there for the moment. Mohammed Shweta, Beirut Bureau Chief, you stay safe. Thanks so much for your reporting. And this is where I want to come to you, Shani. Give us an idea of the thinking in Israel. What does Israel see as the next steps when it comes to Lebanon?
Well, first of all, Israel sees the fight against Hezbollah in separately connected to what's happening in Iran. It's not like they don't promise that once the war in Iran is over or there's a different, their fight, their battle against Hezbollah is one that they've been actually planning to execute for a long time. And they were almost happy for the opportunity for, Hezbollah aggression to execute that plan and to finally, as they say, bring Hezbollah to its knees. They also try to sell it to the Lebanese in a sense of, we are helping you to finally get rid of Hezbollah and strengthen the power and the reign of the Lebanese government. So that's when it comes to Hezbollah. We're not going to see Israel, stopping anytime soon. They were preparing for a dual battle, Iranian Hezbollah. That's always been part of the plan. It's always been also part of the plan on Iran when it prompted Hezbollah as the main proxy on the Israeli northern border many decades ago.
It just, correct me if I'm wrong, Shani, but then seeing it from the the outside, I mean, you perhaps have a different perspective, and therefore you're the right person to ask this question to. It just seems that Israel is in perpetual war since 2023. I mean, with no end in sight, it would appear. I mean, at what point do these operations stop, whether against Hezbollah or Iran? I mean, arguably the latest hostilities against Hezbollah or from the Hezbollah side started based on the attacks on Iran. But what is the end game here for Israel? When does Israel say, okay, we have achieved certain strategic objectives or military objectives? When does it stop?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head, as they say, because it is true that this is a continuation, aggressiveness or retaliatory strikes, or, you know, it depends on where you stand. Israel has been very militant, very aggressive, very unabashed in its response to any sign of aggression and threat in the region since October 7th, and it's directly connected to that. Israelis see it as the only way to reestablish their deterrence, their positioning in the Middle East. They almost epic closure to, for example, Khamenei, who 3 days after October 7th tweeted, "This will be the beginning of the end of Israel." Israel is now showing, you know, its upper hand, saying, "Well, let's see whose end it is in the end." And so for Israel, it's all connected, and they want to keep on pushing until basically they eradicate the extremist Islamist axis, connected, funded, and in many ways prompted by Iran through the toppling of the Iranian regime and through bringing down the other proxies, nearby proxies, to their knees.
A word on the United States here. What is the role that the United States is playing here? I mean, you've seen the United States basically almost support Israeli actions in the region militarily under this administration particularly. What is the United States game plan here? What is the United States gaining out of this? And how does Israel see its relationship with the United States moving forward, given everything that you've just said? Well,
I think when you say we need to separate between the U.S. and President Trump. Netanyahu and Trump are very close. There's no doubt that we've never seen such alliance between an Israeli prime minister and an American president as we are seeing here, almost a convergence of not just goals but also means. You know, we've never seen such tight military collaboration. But both of these people are very controversial figures, and Netanyahu might be, you know, there's also some voices in Israel, he might be jeopardizing the future strategic relationship with the U.S. once there is a different, government there, a different administration, on account of his connection with Trump. But just America's end goal. I think Trump fell in love with the idea of being a very almighty leader who has the ability to very effectively use the world's biggest military after Venezuela. And I think that the temptation of knowing that after, there's been a secret wish of every president since 1979 to topple the Iranian regime, he saw the opportunity. They've never been so weak. I think it was too hard for him to pass on.
All right. Thanks for that analysis. Shani, it's always a pleasure talking to you. I think just for all of you who are just maybe joining us on this live stream, just a quick recap. You know, we began this live stream talking about how Iran is able to sustain a military response when faced with the overwhelming might and military might of the United States and Israel. That's what we were talking about. And then we were looking at the a wider region and seeing what the situation in Lebanon is, because Israeli troops are already operating in southern Lebanon. Here is a further update. Now, this is just some of the latest developments in the war with Iran. Now, Israel has carried out fresh strikes on Iran's capital. Israel's military said fighter jets had targeted key government buildings, including the presidential office, and blasts have also been reported in Karaj and Isfahan. The Iranian Red Crescent says at least 787 people have been killed in the air strikes on Iran. Israel is also striking what it says are Hezbollah targets in Lebanon, and there have been strikes in Beirut, and Israeli troops are now deployed in southern Lebanon, as I was saying a short while back. Explosions have also been reported across several Gulf states as Iran retaliates. Among them, a drone attack on the U.S. Embassy in the Saudi capital, Riyadh, which has caused minor damage. So that's a quick update on where things stand right now. I don't know, Binish, if the chat is throwing up certain interesting comments and questions that we can potentially
We have one comment that we can share. It's from Collective Proof 1973. It's about Strait of Hormuz. And mere threat of attack will ensure, so mere threat from Iran will ensure that insurance companies, they will avoid insurance coverage of the shipping.
We've already seen it. It already happened 2 days back. We've seen also the oil and energy prices rising even further today in all over Europe. I think when we talk about this, there's one thing we have hardly mentioned in this recent coverage today. The Gulf countries, because if we're talking about energy in the Straits of Hormuz, they're immediately directly affected by that. And there seems to be a mistake that Iran has made there, alienating the very few allies it had in the region when it even attacked places like Qatar, who was, on the one hand, Qatar managed for many years to have the cake and keep it whole, in the sense that it had hosted and still hosts the biggest base the U.S. has in the region. Yeah. But then at the same time, it's still very friendly with Iran, or used to be at least. Yeah.
Shani, no Gulf country has retaliated.
Not directly, no. But I would say, if we want to see where this is heading and what we need to be noticing in the next couple of hours and days, definitely, I suspect we've seen today the spokesperson of the Qatari foreign minister saying, again, condemning how the Iranians were targeting civilian infrastructure and not necessarily the military bases that are located in Qatar, saying we will not let this go without response, basically saying they are going to retaliate. We have seen a joint statement that they released yesterday, the Qataris with Bahrainis, UAE, Saudi Arabia. I suspect we will see a joint response. When we see one, maybe soon enough, that will be part of that. And the Americans have also, even Pete Hegseth, are trying to make sure that they have the backs of their partners in the Gulf, after having heard some criticism coming up from the Gulf that maybe the Americans were too busy, coordinating with Israel and not taking care enough of the other allies in the region.
I know the Binish is monitoring the chat, and you're bringing in some of the questions, but there is just one question that I did see, because I'm looking at the chat as well, because why not? This is a question, I think it's a really good one. This is from Deodat Deshmukh 5494. He's asking, Shani, how can US-Israeli pressure genuinely fracture the Iranian regime's internal cohesion rather than simply triggering institutional survival mechanisms within its security apparatus?
Well, the Israelis and Americans were counting on the fact that the administration is as fragile as ever been, and they're counting on internal opposition, internal dissent, internal fragmentation, and they're also counting on the Iranian people in masses to pick up when they leave or wherever it is that they stop. But we are also hearing, for example, some reports about special Israeli units on the ground overnight in Israel. We don't have confirmation for that.
In Iran.
In Iran.
Yeah.
So I won't be surprised if there's some sense of covert forces, covert operation that are, either Israel through the Mossad or the Americans with the CIA, trying to prep up the opposition and support that for the next phase. But there's definitely no guarantee that this plan that the U.S. and Israel has started executing will work out as they planned, assuming their plan is so detailed. We are not even sure about that.
We're not sure about that. Early days yet, it's just 4 days into this particular conflict. But just to give you a bird's eye view, if you like, just as a perspective, because there is a map that Binish, you were looking at. This is basically a map. We'll throw it up on the screen just for you all to look at. Now, this is basically a map that shows the attacks against Iran. Those are the dots in red. And what you see in yellow on this map is basically the retaliatory attacks from Iran in the wider neighborhood. And just looking at it from this distance, you can see the red far outweighs the yellow, which is to say that the attacks that Iran is facing is far more than how it is being able to retaliate, which is also significant in its wages. By the way, this map is also available in the chat. So if you'll just scroll up and down, you will be able to see this map. This is from US Central Command. Is that correct?
Yes.
Binish, and you all can zoom in. It's an interactive map. And I just find it interesting. It's worth bringing this up. I don't know what you guys feel about this. It just seems that Iran is taking a lot of punishment. Its neighbors are also taking punishment, but it seems to be getting a lot more punishment than it did perhaps last year, but it's still being able to respond to it. But we don't think that that's going to happen for a long time.
What do you mean what's not going to happen?
How long will they be able to respond to these attacks?
What we're seeing, in a way, the fact that Israel has managed and the Americans have managed to hit so many launches in Iran actually slows down their pace of barrages, of launching towards Israel or the Gulf. But in a way, it's backfiring against Israel because it means that Iran has slower pace of depleting its missile stockpiles, and they can keep longer with lower intensity instead of what we've seen in 12 days war, which was high intensity on a shorter time. And when playing for time, there is no doubt that Israel time is ticking faster than the one of Iran, and this could be maybe a weak point on the long term if this is getting prolonged as we are progressing.
A quick prediction. We have about a minute to sort of close out the show. Will this continue in the next few weeks?
Well, we're definitely, I would assume, not before 2 weeks are gone. I think that's the most conservative estimations we are hearing. We are nowhere near ending. Yes, I'm afraid so.
Thanks for that, Shani Rosanes, a Middle East analyst. Thank you all for joining on the live stream, and thanks for all your comments. Binish, thank you so much for monitoring the chat. In case you're just joining us, just remember that DW News is continually covering this particular war. We are 4 days in. Who knows how long this lasts? There have been potential offers of talks that have been made, but nothing really concrete has materialized. You can expect more live streams on DW News on its various social media channels and also on television. And naturally, I'm Biresh Banerjee in Berlin. Thanks so much for spending this part of the day with us. We'll be monitoring the story, and keep tuned for updates on dw.com or our other social media channels. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.